to today's webinar. I'm John James and I'm your host for today's event. Now, the technology we're using today is really easy to use. Here's an image of the GoToWebinar floating control panel. It's fully expanded when you first join the webinar, but the clever little thing hides itself after a couple of minutes so that you can better concentrate on the presentation. Now, if you just click on the small orange arrow at the top of that skinny bar, it'll then expand out again so you can see all the panels. To watch today's webinar, you're probably sitting in front of your computer. However, if you wanted, you could be watching on your mobile device, such as an iPad or an Android tablet. The catch, however, is that you can watch and listen, but you can't raise your hand, vote in a poll, or type in a question. Sorry about that. Hopefully they'll upgrade the software soon. Now, to listen to the webinar, you can either use your computer's mic and speakers or a telephone. We've had a few issues with the computer audio in the past, so if it gets too annoying for you, you can swap over and use the telephone at any time. We do provide a toll-free number, so it won't cost you any more. If you do need to swap over, just go back to the audio control panel and click on the telephone option and make sure that you use the numbers in your screen to dial in, because we all get our personalised numbers. Now, folks, you can interact with us today by raising your electronic hand at any time or typing in the questions box down the bottom here. Only the organisers get to see your hand or what you type. And if you do ask a question, I'll read it out so it's anonymous. So, hey, let's practice. If you can hear me clearly, can you please raise your electronic hand? Ah, great. Okay. I was beginning to worry for a moment there. Okay, excellent. And great to see that we've got a live audience. If you click on the little hand symbol again, it'll lower your hand for you. So that's great. Thanks for that, folks. Now, to get the most out of today's presentation, I suggest you turn off your email and mobile phones and tune into what our presenters are saying. Take some notes as we go along and jot down questions as they come to mind and type them in the question panel. Today's presentation is being recorded for you to view afterwards, and I'll send you the link in due course. It's great that you've been able to join us live for this session though, as that way you can ask the questions that you'd like answered. Now, let's get a quick indication as to where people are from. So you can see the little poll on your screens there now. Can you please click to indicate your normal location? That's great. I can see most people have voted, so I'll just close that off in 3, 2, 1. Okay, well, it's great to see that we've got about a fifth of our audience from Western Australia, a fifth from the Territory, and the rest from Queensland. So thanks for that, folks. So I find it always interesting to know where people are coming from. So in just a moment, we'll be hearing from today's guest presenters, of which we have two. And at this stage, I'll allow them to present their PowerPoint. So our first speaker tonight is Dionne Walsh, and she's lived and worked in the rangelands for 16 years and has spent the past 11 of those in the Territory. Prior to joining the government in 2009, she ran her own NRM consulting business in Alice Springs and Katherine. These days, she oversees the department's rangeland research program throughout the Territory, which aims to help producers get the very best performance out of their native pastures. Our other speaker is Ross Peatling, who is manager of NAPCO's Alexandria Station in the Barkly Tablelands. After attending Longreach Pastoral College back in the 60s, Ross began work as a ringer at Strathstar near Longreach for the Hooker Pastoral Company. In the 70s, he worked for the Stanbroke Pastoral Company at Duchess, where he advanced to head stockman. And since then, he's worked at a variety of properties, and in 1991, made the journey to Alexandria, which has been his home ever since. So, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome along Dionne and Ross to our webinar today. Thanks for being brave and agreeing to help us learn more about wet season spelling.
I'd like to welcome you to this webinar on wet season spelling. And we've called it a grease and oil change for your grass. And I guess the purpose of doing that was to highlight that just like a road train or a Toyota, you can't run your grasses and your pastures at full tilt without ever stopping them and giving them a bit of a tune-up here and there. So to me, wet season spelling is that sort of process. Just wanted to give a quick plug to some of the organisations that have sponsored some of the work that we'll talk about today, in particular the spelling trial at Alexandria, where we're both sitting today. And that includes MLA, the Australian Government, and of course the Northern Territory Government, which is who I work for. Our department is also very grateful to the North Australian Pastoral Company and the staff at Alexandria Station for their ongoing support of all the research that we've been very privileged to do here over the years. So this is the material that we're going to cover in our webinar today. As you know, it's about wet season spelling. So we're going to talk about what is wet season spelling, why you might do it, and just some, I guess, the theoretical principles behind how you might go about it. And then, quite luckily for us, I guess, we've got Ross Peatling here from Alex, who's going to give us some ideas about the practical experiences that he's had actually doing wet season spelling in the Territory. So to talk a little bit about a demonstration trial about wet season spelling that we have running here, and just finalise the webinar with a few take-home messages and recommendations. So what is wet season spelling? It's the removal of grazing for some or all of the wet season. And I guess in areas that don't have a defined wet season, it's about removing grazing during times of active pasture growth. And I just, before I go any further, I probably should just say that the material in this webinar is very much sort of aimed at producers in the northern part of Australia. So we're talking about northern Queensland, the northern part of the Territory, the Kimberley and parts of the Pilbara. And there's slightly different recommendations for more arid areas of the rangelands of Australia, and you can contact your future beef or departmental person in your area to get some more advice about that if you live in those areas. So why do wet season spelling or pasture spelling? There's several reasons for doing it. The one that we'll talk about the most today is to improve land conditions. But you can also use it to do things like accumulate seed that you can then defer its usage until later in the year. And you can also use spelling in order to increase fuel loads if you want to undertake a prescribed burning program or something like that. And I just wanted to make the point too that wet season spelling isn't quite the same as de-stocking during dry years or drought. Particularly in the case of trying to improve land condition, you need to be doing that spelling during periods of active pasture growth. So during dry periods when those grasses are dormant, you may get some benefit from just giving them spell from grazing to protect them, but in order to improve the seed supply and the robustness of those grasses, they have to be actively growing. So people often ask us, why spelling is a good thing to do, and, what bearing is it going to have on the bottom line of their business or the productivity of their herd. So I thought I'd just show you 3 good reasons, I guess, for why a wet season spelling program might be beneficial. The first good reason is that good land condition has a direct impact on how many cattle you can carry on a property or in a paddock. So we've got a graph here from the Mitchell Grass Downs of the Central Barkly region in the Northern Territory. And the brown columns show the pasture growth that you would expect to get in about 50% of years. And you can see that in the very best land condition, which is A land condition, it can grow just over 2,000 kilograms per hectare in an average year. But as land condition declines down towards poorer conditions, sort of C and D conditions, the amount of grass that grows also declines quite quickly. And that has a direct impact on how many cattle can be carried, which is the blue line on this graph. So in this particular instance, the difference between A condition and C land condition in terms of carrying capacity is that you can carry less than half the number of cattle in C condition that you could run if it was in A condition. Wet season spelling is a way of improving land condition, but also maintaining good land condition if you've already got it. Good reason number 2 is that wet season spelling can actually increase your live weight gain per hectare. And this is because that the improvement in land condition actually allows better per head performance. And there is some evidence to show that you can run slightly higher but still safe stocking rates if you also include wet season spelling. So on this graph, this is live weight gain per hectare over a period of 29 years. So the average over 29 years at different stocking rates with or without spelling. On the far left of the graph, we've got 7 adult equivalents per square K. This is for a black soil in the central Bartley region. And you can achieve on average about 5 kilograms per hectare of live weight gain at that stocking rate without spelling. But if you go up to 9 adult equivalents per square K, the actual live weight gain per hectare decreases a bit, goes down to about 3 kilos per hectare. What's happening there is there's potentially a slight dip in land conditions, but also each animal gets less selectivity, and so their diet quality is a bit lower, so their live weight gain is a bit lower, and that's not compensated by the additional number of animals that are being run. If, however, you run that stocking rate and introduce a 6-month spell every 4 years, the live weight gain per hectare actually goes up to around 7 kilograms per hectare. And that's because you're maintaining that good land condition that not only allows you to run the higher numbers safely, but the diet quality is also very good. Unfortunately, when you run stocking rates that are too high, you can actually have detrimental effects on live weight gain. And even with spelling at 12 AEs per square K, the live weight gain isn't any better than if you just ran 7 AEs per square K. The third good reason is we hear a lot of resistance to wet season spelling here in the north because people are reluctant to lock up country and take it out of production for a wet season or for a year. And some work that we've recently done in the Northern Grazing Systems project showed that incorporating a 6-month spell once every 4 years didn't necessarily hurt the hip pocket. And in the top table we show total profit, and they're quite similar between a no spelling and a spelling situation, spelling performing just slightly better, and similar story for the bottom table, which is showing gross margin per adult equivalent. So it doesn't necessarily have to hurt your hip pocket to lock country up for a wet season spell if it's done in a fairly routine, regular way. So how does wet season spelling actually work in a biological sense? Well, interestingly, I'm sure most of the producers out there know from just their experience of things like holding paddocks and cooler paddocks and laneways, that you can really hammer country sometimes for a short period of time, but then if it's spelled for a longer period of time, the actual grass response is quite good. And there's lots of, I guess, experience out there to show that that's the case. But surprisingly, there's very little scientific proof that wet season spelling works, and there's currently a lot of work going on to actually investigate this issue of wet season spelling from a scientific perspective. There's plenty of biological reasons why wet season spelling should work, and this photo is a demonstration of that. This photo shows 2 grasses that were the same at the start of the wet season, but the one on the right was clipped early and often to simulate repeated grazing, whereas the other one was left unclipped for 6 to 8 weeks after the wet season started, or the watering started. And you can see the difference in the root biomass and the amount of grass that's available there for animals. And the grass on the right is very vulnerable now to a dry spell or being pulled out of the ground or dying. And the amount of bulk on the one on the left is actually quite beneficial in terms of an animal production point of view. And this is related to the 4 phases of pasture growth. And this diagram really shows the compromise that producers face, especially early on in the wet season. Early on in the wet season, you get that first flush of green pick coming through, and of course that pasture is really high quality and the cattle really love it and they do well on it. But of course there's not very much bulk there, so those plants are very vulnerable and sensitive to high grazing pressure. But as the season progresses, obviously the yield increases, but unfortunately the pasture quality decreases. And it's those phase 2 grasses where that balance and that compromise is reached, whereby you've got good bulk and the quality is still not too bad, but the grasses are less vulnerable to grazing. As they move through into phase 3 and phase 4, grasses become less sensitive to grazing, and in phase 4 they're in the dormant phase and have quite low sensitivity to grazing at that time of the year. And here's a picture I took just north of Catherine recently, just to show that very first early phase of the wet season when you've got that green pick coming through. You can imagine if you put a lot of cattle on this piece of country at this time, those grasses will probably get cleaned up pretty quickly, and that really sets them back for that early part of the wet season. And they probably won't reach their final sort of potential in terms of bulk by the end of the wet season, and their reproductive potential if they're continually grazed at that stage throughout the whole course of the wet season. So I'll hand over to you, John, and then we'll get Ross on board shortly.
Lovely. Thanks for that, Dionne. By the way, there's been a little bit of feedback, so I'm guessing that the second handset that you two are using is actually picking up despite our best trial beforehand. So I'm thinking it's probably best if we can just go back to the one handset, please. So folks, this is now an opportunity for you to ask some questions or make some comments. So you can just use the little box at the bottom of your floating control panel, and don't forget, if it's disappeared on you, just click on the little orange arrow and it'll expand again for you. So at this stage there aren't any questions, so I think we'll just move on. So okay, but actually, so if you don't have any questions for us, then we've got one for you. So if we look at the next slide there, Dionne. Yes, so now we've got a poll. So the question is, do you currently do wet season spelling or rotational grazing? So I'll quickly launch that poll for us. So folks, can you select the appropriate response? So none at all, only the holding paddock and laneways, yes, but fairly informal system, or yes, a formal system. So folks, come and tell us what your response is here. I can see most people have now put in an answer, so I'll just close it off in a few seconds. So 3, 2, 1, thank you. And I'll just share those responses with you. So a small number said none at all, but then about a third of the audience tonight are saying they do only the holding paddocks. About another third are saying yes, but fairly informal system, and another third are saying yes, a formal system. So Dionne, does that surprise you at all? Okay,
no, it doesn't really surprise me, I guess, that there's a real range of approaches to wet season spelling or rotational grazing amongst the audience. It's probably fairly similar percentages to what... Okay, well, we might get Ross to kick off here, because apparently his handset's working a lot better than mine. So Ross, perhaps could you tell us a little bit about your background? How long have you been in the industry, and what's the situation here at Alexandria?
Thanks, Dionne. Yeah, well, I sort of kicked off the industry in 1967 at Longreach, and I've just worked my way through to the system to eventually manage Alexandria. And we're here now looking for total production of our country without sort of damaging the base resource.
And how much rainfall do you have here, and what are the major land types that you've got here?
The major land types are self-mulching, cracking, dark grey to black soil country, some red country. I'm not sure of the scientific name of that, but I call it desert. And the average rainfall is about 15 inches.
And what sort of enterprise are you running here, and what markets are you targeting with the cattle from here?
The enterprise for NAPCO is just a calf factory. We try and brand as many calves as possible per year, which transfer to grower systems in the Queensland Channel Country, Central Queensland, and as in Roma and Emerald, to backgrounding properties, and also to a little bit towards eastern central Queensland, Nebo, and then to grow out and back into the feedlot. Our feedlot in the Darling Downs to go into Japox trade, Woolworths, and markets like that. Okay,
so we might talk a bit more now about your actual wet season spelling program. It strikes me that wet season spelling here at Alex isn't just done in isolation. It's part of a much broader program of animal management and land management, including very good stocking rate management. But how did you get started with wet season spelling?
It was fairly simple, really, because we went into a major drought in 2008, and I mean a major drought. We were sort of coping okay until we got some winter rain, which flattened our existing feed, and we grew a terrific crop of galvanised burr, which really concerned me. And these were in country which has been grazed for many, many years, as in probably 100 years. We decided we had to do something about it. I decided we had to do something about it, and we just turned some bores off and spelled it. And it's after a couple of years and a couple of seasons that came back to square one with good Mitchell, good Flinders, and so the spelling worked, and we're great advocates of it from now on.
Okay, so that prompted the spelling, but now that it gets a different situation. You don't always have things like that galvanised burr and stuff happening. How do you decide what to spell now that spelling's a more routine part of your management here?
Well, we'll probably have to go back a couple of steps, because in 2003 or 4, I had to put a big paper together for our board on how to increase production of Alex. And the best way to do that was put in more water, increase carrying capacity without knocking the country around. So, for example, if a big paddock had 10 bores in it, and we put in another 15 or 12 or 14 waters into that paddock, we could probably double the carrying capacity, but also spell bores. So, and that is the plan now of the whole system, is to get maximum production out of a paddock, but spell bores. So we've always got, say, for example, if a bore's got now 14 waters in it, we try and spell 3 or 4 a year, so they come back to normal, and just keep doing that forever.
And how long do you know, or how long do you have to spell for, and how do you know how long a piece of country needs to spell for, or do you just wait and see how the season turns out?
It's mainly waiting to see how the season turns out, and water quality and everything's got a lot to do with it. But we can generally, we generally only have to now spell a bore for 12 months, let that seed fall off and turn the water back on again, and away they go. But I think to this stage it's working. Dionne will back it up with a bit of science in a couple of years' time. But we've certainly got maximising production and still got good grass.
And just finally, were there any sort of dead ends that you ran into, or has it gone pretty smoothly? Is there anything that people should be aware of, I guess, if they're giving spelling a go for the first time?
I think the big thing is, if you are going to spell some country, like we've got paddocks here, which is 250,000 acres, well, if it had 4 bores in it, we couldn't spell it because it was we couldn't spell a bore because it was too difficult to ship cattle away from a bore. So we've done this water improvement program with a radius of 10 kilometres on waters. We now can turn a trough off and to spell a bore, and cattle will walk away by themselves without having to be shifted, which is a big thing. That's a big deciding factor. And I think it's got to be pretty simple. It's got to be kept simple. We cannot afford to lock up a big paddock. So I think what we're doing now is working quite well, but we'll be able to say a bit more in the future.
Okay, thanks, Ross. John, have you got a sense of how the audio is going at the moment?
Yes, it's doing okay, thanks, Dionne.
All right, well, I'll just talk briefly now about the trial that we're doing here at Alexandria. It's a wet season spelling and stocking rate trial, and we're not only looking at the land condition benefits, but we're also looking at some of the animal production benefits of these practices that Ross has been putting in place in recent times. The actual trial itself started a couple of years ago, and Ross asked us to make a long-term commitment to the trial, and so what we've done is we've designed it in such a way as it's pretty cheap for us to run it, so that if the external funding we've currently got to pay for it runs out, we should be able to keep resourcing it from our internal departmental funds. So we're quite committed to staying here and doing this for a long period of time. And already the site has become a bit of a showpiece for things like industry information days, and we took a group of young head stockmen and young managers out to the site last year to show them and teach them some of the things that Ross had learnt in wet season spelling. So the trial is actually running in a paddock called East Rankin. It's a pretty big paddock by some people's measure, 700 square k's. And Ross was telling me today that in 1994 there was only 6 waters in this paddock, and today there's 16 due to that water development program that he started. And so now that paddock is actually very well watered. And what we're doing is we've run a 5-kilometre long transect out from 3 different bores in this paddock, and those 3 bores are different ages. So there was one that was drilled in 1910, one in 2004, and one that was just put in recently in 2010. And the sorts of production measures that we're interested in looking at, I guess, at the paddock scale, are things like how carrying capacity has changed, some of the turn-off and breeder performance information out of this particular paddock. And you can see in the photos there that the 2 older bores at 250 metres out from the water had about 1,500 kilos of dry matter per hectare in June 2011. But that brand new bore, which I think had only been used for 1 season when we did that measurement, had 3,200 kilograms per hectare of grass there. And the purpose of the trial is really to monitor whether the wet season spelling and stocking rate management can keep those really high levels of pasture growth close to the bore like at that new bore, and then actually keep that in that sort of condition, and whether wet season spelling can also lift the production of the grass at those older bores, and we're also looking at some species composition information as well. So far, as I said, there's been a massive increase in watered area in that paddock, and just since 2005, I think the watered area has increased from about 74% to 95% on a 5-kilometre grazing radius basis. And as Ross said earlier, increasing the number of waters has really created opportunities to spell different bores in this paddock. It's a very uniform paddock, Mitchell grass paddock, and the cattle seem to move themselves quite well away from those areas that no longer have the water in them. The stocking rates in the whole paddock are quite sustainable. They are well within the recommended ranges for this land type in this part of the world. So there's you can carry up to 15 adult equivalents per square K on this country here, and I think the average stocking rate since 2005 has been about 5 adult equivalents per square K. And one of the interesting things we found that even at those old bores, more than 65% of the pasture composition in 2011 and 12 was palatable species. And that tells me that the underlying stocking rate management of this paddock is pretty spot on. There's good grass levels, palatable grass, and wet season spelling is just that slight tune-up that's required to get those palatable species and that pasture growth coming closer to those bores if they've been grazed. So are there any questions, John?
That's a good question. Well, here we go. Since different grasses mature at different stages during the wet season, how can we decide when country has been spelled enough?
That's a question for Ross.
I'll have a go at that one, John. I would think our main grass is Mitchell, and that's what we work on. Once that you've got re-establishment of Mitchell country going to seed and dropping seed, well, I think that's a pretty fair indication.
Okay, good. Thanks, Ross. And perhaps another one for you is, how long does it take to really see an improvement in land condition from regular spelling?
I think if country is not sort of knocked around too badly, a one wet season spell will do it. When I first started on deciding spell country, we were pretty well badly degraded around that number 10 bore, which is the old bore in East Rankin, and that took a 2-year spell to bring it back to normal. But we continue to use that paddock all the time.
Right.
I think some other data that we have too, John, from other parts of the territory shows that it can take several years. So a regular spelling program, say once every 4 year spelling program, or 2 consecutive spells followed by once every 4 years, that sort of spelling regime can sometimes take several years to actually see an improvement. It's very, very dependent on the seasonal conditions that are experienced at the time of the spelling.
Okay. Another question's come in. So is there any measure of the herbage content of older versus younger boar sampling?
We do have some measures of that. I don't have any results just to hand at the moment, but the data we're collecting does allow us to break that down in terms of whether the plants are perennials, annuals, herbages, grasses, palatable, not palatable. Yeah, so there's a whole range of indicators that we're picking up through the data. Unfortunately, I don't have any results that I can easily lay my brain on at the moment.
That's okay. And I know at the end, Dionne, you'll be sharing your contact details, so if people want to contact you or Ross, they'll be able to do so afterwards. And now there's just one more question that's come in. The audience has gotten the hang of asking questions here. So how often are waters spilled on average?
That's probably a fairly difficult question to answer at the moment, John, because we only started this program in 2005. We completed one big paddock in 2005. We're trying to complete one ever since then. But we spell waters, at least 2 waters in every paddock since then, depending on season. But we're sort of trying to formalise a spelling program for the whole property.
Great. Okay. Thanks, guys. That's all the questions for now, so back to you.
All right. Well, I just wanted to, I guess, tell a cautionary tale about spelling and really highlight the importance of getting stocking rate and spelling right together. And this is some actual theoretical model data that we generated for the Victoria River District. But what it shows is land condition under different stocking rates with or without spelling. And you can see in the background there, the shading shows the different land condition states. And what we did was we started off a black soil in the VRD in C land condition. And then we applied different stocking rates in the grass pasture growth model. And we also applied some of those stocking rates. We applied a 1 season in every 4 wet season spell. And we're using the percentage of perennial grasses in the pasture as an indicator of land condition for this particular graph. And the blue bars show the rainfall, and this is actual rainfall from a station in the southern Victoria River District. Now, essentially what it shows is that you can improve land condition very quickly if you run very conservative stocking rates. So in this case, on this land type, conservative stocking rate is about 7 adult equivalents per square kilometre. And you can achieve that quite quickly at those low stocking rates, even without spelling. If you want to run more animals, you can also get an increase in land condition. If you do it without spelling, it just takes a few years longer to get from C condition up into B and then into A. And under this particular rainfall regime, or this run of seasons, it took several years, but it got there eventually. We were able to speed up that land condition recovery if we put that spelling in, so that 1 year in every 4 spell actually achieved the land condition recovery similar to having a lighter stocking rate. But the beauty about this was that you had the additional animal production benefits of being able to run the slightly higher safe stocking rate. And even with the spelling, the animal production was higher than if you ran the low stocking rate. The main point of the graph, though, is on those red lines that are bumping along the bottom of the graph. And they show what happens if you run an unsustainable stocking rate. And I should say, you know, unfortunately, there might be some VRD producers on the line, but some producers are running stocking rates in that order on this sort of land type in the VRD. And at that sort of stocking rate, you will never get an improvement in land condition, regardless of whether you spell or not. So it's all very well to commit to a program of wet season spelling, but unless you've got your underlying stocking rate right, you won't actually achieve anything at all in terms of land condition recovery. And the animal production performance from that high stocking rate is also very poor, particularly in poor rainfall seasons. So here we are for some take-home messages before we open it up to a few more questions. Hopefully we've been able to show that spelling doesn't necessarily have to have a negative impact on animal performance or your hip pocket. In fact, it can be beneficial if you get the right routine of wet season spelling going, and you can get the outcomes in land condition and animal performance. Also demonstrated that grasses are very sensitive early in the wet season. So if you're able to commit to a wet season spell, probably the best time to achieve that is to be able to take those cattle out perhaps in second round, or if you've got good access, as soon as those first rains start, you should be thinking about getting those cattle out of that paddock so that they're not grazing those grasses when they're very, very vulnerable to grazing. And spelling is only effective if your stocking rate is right. And you can get some advice about what those safe stocking rates are from extension people in the departments and from very experienced producers, people like Ross, for example. In terms of spelling to maintain land condition, our current recommendation for the top end of Australia is to spell 1 year in every 4 for a whole wet season. The rules are a bit different in the more arid areas, and certainly give you a bit more information about that if you want to contact us later on after the webinar. If you want to actually improve land condition, you may need to spell for consecutive wet seasons, like Ross told us this example where he had to spell for 2 consecutive wets to get the sort of result that he was looking for from that. So there's a lot of flexibility that can occur with a wet season spelling program. And that was, I guess, the final take-home message I wanted to make too was if you're committed to some sort of regular spelling regime, that will give you a good result in terms of land condition, but it does have to be a flexible approach. You can't just apply wet season spelling in a really inflexible, rigid way because the best outcome of wet season spelling really comes if you can tailor the spelling to coincide with good seasons. So if the season doesn't look like it's going to turn out very well, or you need a paddock or a bore for a commercial purpose that you hadn't envisaged, then there's no shame in actually deferring that spelling for another time when you'll get a better outcome. And I guess there's a couple of other things to be aware of. Is that if you are looking to spell a piece of country, you either need to sell the cattle that are in that country in order to lighten off the stocking rate, or you need to find somewhere else on the property, obviously, where there is genuine capacity to take those additional cattle, because there's no point loading up other paddocks and damaging their land condition if it's not going to achieve, if you're going to achieve a spell in that paddock, but sacrifice another paddock to do it. It's not really the way to go. So being aware of whether you've got true capacity or whether those cattle have to go. There's plenty of information getting around at the moment about spelling. There's quite a few case studies and fact sheets, particularly for Queensland and the Territory, on the Future Beef website. So if you go there and look under the project material or look up spelling, you'll find a lot of information there. And I also wanted to give a bit of a plug for a proper spelling experiment that's being funded by MLA and being run by the Queensland Department. And Paul Jones from Emerald, who I think was going to tune in tonight, I'm not sure whether he's here, but he is managing that project, and there's information about that on the Future Beef website, and they probably have some information locally as well if you want to chase that up. But there's 2 aspects to that experiment. There's a long-term trial happening about 55 kilometres from Claremont, and then there's another aspect of the trial that's being done at the Wombiana trial site. And that's fairly early days so far, but keep tuned in to hear more about that. We're also doing some work here in the Territory. There's some burning spelling demonstration work going on at a station called Delamere in the Victoria River District, and of course the one at Alexandria here. We're also involved in some intensive rotational grazing work at Beetaloo and Mungabroom Station in the Barkly, and we've got a trial going on our research station near Alice Springs. And for any Territory people that might be interested in knowing a bit more about how those trials are going and what the results and recommendations coming out of them are, they can log on to our newsletters, the Rural Reviews and the Barkly Beef newsletters, which can be found on the Department of Primary Industries website. And I guess apart from contacting us, we'd certainly encourage you to get onto the Future Beef website. There's contact details there for people in Queensland and Western Australia and other parts of the Territory who could give you advice and come to your place and actually help you with some wet season spelling type advice. But of course, feel free to contact myself, and I think Ross is also quite happy to take questions after the webinar about anything you might have heard today. Thanks, John.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dionne. So I've got a couple of questions here. So the first one is, can you clarify, do these spelling recommendations apply to all rangeland areas of Australia?
No, they don't. Some of the work that we've done shows that as the country becomes a bit more arid, you need to actually increase the frequency and duration of spelling if a land condition improvement is what you're after. And that's because the number of times that you have good seasonal conditions to achieve some benefit from spelling, sometimes a bit few and far between. And if you were just in some sort of regimented type spelling program, you might miss those good seasons. But as you go further north, the reason we're recommending a 1 year in 4 spell is that we've found through some work we've done that gives you the best land condition outcome, but it also gives you the best financial performance and animal performance outcome in some of the work that we've done. Now, a lot of that has been done in a theoretical capacity, and some of this work that's going on the ground now is really trying to see whether that happens in real life. But that's our current recommendation based on the best information we have.
Okay, thanks, Dionne. And I've got a question for you, Ross, that obviously it takes a lot of time and effort having these research programs being held on your property there. So what benefits do you and your company get from being involved with these?
John, I think it's, you know, as I said before, we're just looking for maximum production of the country we've got without damaging it. You can muck around with genetics, staff, anything you like, but you can't do anything at all unless you've got grass to back it up. So it's a very, very prudent part of the whole operation. And I actually took Dionne out this afternoon to number 3 bore, which is probably 10 years older than number 10. And country was burnt there last year. It's been flogged in a holding paddock, and it's had some storms on it. It just looks absolutely beautiful. So that's what we want to keep trying to do, is just maintain the base resource, increase production without killing that grass basis.
He doesn't really flog his country.
No, I wouldn't have thought so. Great. Okay. Well.
And John, if I could just add another quick thing, and I know Mark Lavers is there. I would always recommend to use Ridley's blocks because it's very high quality cardboard.
Okay, thanks, Ross. Okay, so folks, there are no more questions there at the moment, so I'll switch back now to my screen. So, hey, Ross and Dionne, thank you for your presentation tonight, and particularly Ross, thanks for being brave with technology tonight. That's really enabled people, you know, from across Australia to learn from your experience. So thank you for your time that you've put into this. Now, folks, it'd be remiss of me not to mention the Future Beef website. So there's the address for it at the top of the screen that Dionne mentioned before. This is your one-stop shop for beef information across Northern Australia. In due course, you'll find the webinar recording under Resources and then under Multimedia. But as I mentioned earlier, I'll send everyone who's registered for this webinar an email with a link to that and also an evaluation of the event. And while you're at the website, don't forget to click on this little button here to sign up. And that way you'll receive our e-bulletins that'll tell you about future webinars as well. And we have an event calendar, and so you can come here at any time just to see what events are happening around the ridges. Now, of course, we'll be asking your feedback on today's event. We'll be using SurveyMonkey to help us with that, and I'll include the link for that in the email that I send out. So, folks, that's all for today. And once again, I'd really like to thank Ross and Dionne for the great presentation that they gave tonight and for their insights. Really helped us to learn more about wet season spelling. And a big thank you to all our attendees for being along and for interacting so well with us. So thanks, everyone. All the best now until we meet again. Hooroo.